Thank you everyone so much for joining us for Mapping Your CSR Journey, Planning Today for Tomorrow's Future. This event is brought to you by our Corporate Social Responsibility Forum, which is sponsored by our friends at Edelman and Northern Trust. We're so lucky to have their leadership. And as everyone knows, we're going to have a 90-minute event today. We're kicking off first with a framework presentation by Seth, followed by a power panel discussion, and then some time in the breakout rooms. And I'm here to answer any questions as we go along. But before we get started, I'm happy to introduce our CSR Forum co-chair, John Edelman, who will take us off with some opening remarks.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this very important Mapping Your CSR Journey, Planning Today for Tomorrow's Future. I'm proud to be co-chair of the CSR Forum with my friend Connie Lindsay from Northern Trust, and should be a great conversation today. As you know, CSR has become more and more important to each of us in our community and our work in the past year and beyond. And what we hope to accomplish today is give you a perspective on the trends in CSR, how it impacts you in your office, in each of your companies. And going forward, we have a really exciting panel with special experts who will share their experience. And we will first start with a presentation from Seth Green, who's founder of the Baumhart Center. He'll give an overview of CSR and the framework to map that hopefully you'll be able to have some takeaways going forward. And then after that overview, we're going to have the distinguished breakout set. We're going to have a power panel with each of these distinguished speakers to talk about some of their experiences from where they sit. And then at about 9:45, we're going to break out into sessions, each facilitated by one of these speakers. So you'll have a chance to go into more detail on what you've learned and ask any questions that may come up as you see your own journey going forward. So lot to accomplish. Hopefully you'll have some key takeaways and make some great connections on this really important subject. And with no further ado, I'll introduce Seth Green to give the overview introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And I just want to say how honored I am to be with all of you this morning. I am blown away by the programming that has taken place at the Executives Club. And until they invited me to speak, I've had the utmost of respect for the people that they have brought together, which is true of the incredible panel that we have this morning. And I also want to say, John, to you personally, thank you to you and to Northern Trust for sponsoring this and creating this forum as two purpose-led companies. And then to you individually for having this own vision in your philanthropy and starting the Edelman Scholars and really supercharging the rising leadership of social responsibility. So I am truly honored and grateful and energized, even if it's early in the morning. And what I want to talk with all of you about before we move into our panel is how to think about mapping your CSR journeys. And I looked over the list of who's here in the virtual room, and I noticed some of you are new to CSR based on your titles, and others of you are deep into it. And so what I want to do is first very briefly make the case for CSR, and then I want to give you a four-pronged framework for thinking about where you are and how you elevate to that next level in your social responsibility journey. So I'm going to make this case in about 90 seconds, but I didn't want to miss the why of this conversation. CSR matters, and the business leaders across this country are acknowledging that more than ever before. In a Deloitte study that recently came out, 3 in 4 said they see social impact as important or very important to their company strategy. Just years ago, that was less than half of those same respondents saying that it was important or very important. And the reason it's so important is because it matters to all of the stakeholders that allow companies to have high performance. So obviously talent is the most important ingredient of any company. 2/3 of millennials who will soon by 2025 make up about 80% of the workforce are saying that they won't take a job if a potential employer doesn't have strong corporate responsibility practices. And that number is rising. And so we're going to see that going higher and higher in the years ahead. About 9 in 10 customers now are saying similar things about how they make decisions about buying their products. And investors have now put about $41 trillion in an ESG framework that is actually looking at these as criteria to understand performance because they are so related. That's about a third of the assets under management in the US. And so if you're a company that wants talent and you want customers and you want investors, which if you're a company, you likely want all of those things, you need to consider your purpose very carefully because all of these constituencies are looking. And while they were looking before we hit COVID and we began reckoning with the 400-year history of oppression in our country, they are absolutely more important than ever in these unprecedented times. As we look as a country with how we deal more humanely from a COVID standpoint, and as we reckon with what is a longstanding issue, but that finally received the visibility it deserves in the last year. And so what that means is that these issues are actually getting more urgent for companies to address, and companies want to go further up on the social responsibility spectrum. And don't just take my word for it. I'm going to give you a little whetting of the appetite for what is going to be a much longer opportunity for you to learn through the Executives Club about the Edelman Trust Barometer. But I'll just point out two facts that come out of a true gold field of data. The first is that there is a growing sense of urgency. So this is just comparing what people feel this year in importance versus last year. 53% of people feel like it's more important today to address poverty in this country. 51% say it's more important to address climate change. 42% say more important to address discrimination and racism. And guess who they expect to be part of that solution? Their employer. More than half of people say that they want to voice objections more this year than last year. So there is not only an urgency felt, but there is a view that my business should be part of it. And I'm going to make my passion known that my company takes part in making a better world. So that's the context, if you will. That's the why behind the social responsibility that I now want to talk about the how, which is if you're a company out there, how do you think about social responsibility? And I want to give you a very high level framework that we use at the Baumhart Center that I have the joy of leading at Loyola University Chicago that explores how to integrate business strategy and social purpose. And you can see here, there's 4 levels in this framework. And the bottom level, and I'll give you examples in a moment, is compliance. And that literally means you are adhering to the law. And so sometimes you'll see companies that try to present themselves as social. They'll say, we abide by all FDA guidelines and we make sure that everything is up to these rules. And what they're really saying, even though they're trying to put it artfully, is we are legal. And that's absolutely a positive thing versus the opposite. But it is literally, and that's why we show it here, the floor, right? And so we hope all of you are in companies that are in at least that floor 1 of compliance mode. Floor 2 is, okay, we're moving up to a place where we're thinking about how do we share typically a little bit of the benefit of our company intentionally. And so we're thinking about, can we set up a foundation or give other philanthropy that might be a small percentage of our profits? When we get to step 3, we start to integrate into business strategy. And this is, for me, where it gets exciting. Because if you think about a company that's even incredibly generous in giving out 0.5% of their profits, we're still talking about the vast majority of what they do being outside of that framework. When we start talking about responsibility, what companies are now doing is they're taking the business that already exists and they're examining it all to figure out, how do I execute more responsibly? So classic examples, I'm looking at my supply chain. How do I take packaging out so that we have a more positive impact on the environment? So what they're doing here is being very intentional, and they're looking over the business that already exists. They're not necessarily starting from a framework of we're going to move into this area of competition or we're going to build this product for purpose. But now that we have all these lines of business, how do we act as responsibly as possible? And at that 4th level, the strategic integration is where it becomes part of the conversation from the beginning. So that CEOs are literally saying, what markets should I go after? And they're looking at those in both profit terms. We are all for profit, but they're equally saying, which of these is going to make a bigger difference to the world? And I'm going to go after this electric car market, both because it's an opportunity, but also because I want to expand this. I want my business to be part of dealing with the climate crisis in America. And we call that strategic integration versus opportunistic integration, because I'm not just looking at what already exists and figuring out how to make that more responsible. I'm literally basing my decisions from a strategic standpoint on integrating profit and purpose. And that's why the other way to look at this, I just want to show you, because I think it's another way to think about this framework, same levels, but is to look at how they integrate profit and purpose intentionally. I understand that even a company that may just be intending on compliance is still creating jobs and pushing money into the ecosystem and may have other positive benefits, but it's not intentional. And so the question is, how intentionally are they weaving together these two goals? And just to show you the same set of ideas in this Venn diagram, when you're in compliance, you may be having positive impacts, but you're not intentionally weaving those together. You're just doing what you have to. When you're in philanthropy, right, maybe that's 0.5% of your profits, you're beginning to weave, but it's a very small part of your intentional effort. In responsibility, you're starting to bring these together because you're looking over your portfolio and you're saying, how do I move more of that into purpose? But then when you're in that purpose framework, they're now overlapping because every decision you're making as a company is in the context of that higher purpose that you're intending on. And so you're moving more and more to this intersection of the two, where everything you're doing has a profit line and is sustainable, therefore, from an economic standpoint, but also sustainable from a social and environmental standpoint. So let me just give you some examples to round this out, and then I'm going to turn it over to our panel because they are all living in the 3 and 4 of this diagram. So the stage 1 in my mind is a company like Altria, and they have improved, but this is an example from 2001. And it's an example that for me just speaks to how to think about what compliance looks like in its bare form. So they were in the Czech Republic, and they were in a place where they wanted to follow the law, and so they were going to pay different types of taxes, and there was a proposal that there be an additional tax, just like we have in the US, on cigarettes there. And so they actually lobbied the government, and the government said the reason there should be this tax is because it cost people money when people smoked and then had healthcare needs. And they produced a report that went to the government that was part of their lobbying campaign, and they said actually they were saving the Czech government money because there was reduced costs when people died early. And so because their products were killing people, they had less pensions and they needed less housing for the elderly on the government, and those weren't considered in the calculations. And I share this because it's just the ultimate example where they're complying with the law. They are making sure that they're going to pay the taxes that they have to, but they are actively lobbying. And if you can imagine something that is not a purpose, it would be advocating that your product should not be taxed because it is leading to death that's actually lowering the government cost. And so I share that. I know it's an obvious example of what compliance could look like, but I just want to ground us in what's that baseline. Okay, then we get into philanthropy. And I use Wells Fargo intentionally here for 2 reasons. One, they're actually a very philanthropic company. They give over $175 million away. If you look at that as a percentage, it's actually higher than a lot of the other banks. But it was not being integrated into the core practices of the company. So in something of an irony, a big part of their philanthropy goes to financial literacy education. Well, they had opened over 3 million accounts that were not understood by the customers in a fraudulent manner, that were actually adding up costs to the customer and actually making it very hard for them to understand their savings and checking and other features of their banking. And so I share this to say, yes, they are actually philanthropic. They're beginning to put those Venn diagram pieces together, but it's a small part of what they do. And a big part of what they do on the profit side is actually not aligned with that purpose. And so you see that the Venn diagrams are starting to move, but there's still a huge part that is outside that purpose because the core business is not integrating the practices of the philanthropy. I personally think of a company like Target when it comes to responsibility. What they've done is they've looked over everything in their portfolio. They've aligned it to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They have not, though, come out with many explicit products or clear strategic ways of defining their whole company in terms of purpose. So to be clear, they have begun moving the needle. They've begun aligning. You can see that in their report. I think they're having a really positive impact because of these decisions. But from what we can tell, they're not necessarily thinking about how they enter markets, how they change their product lines just based on that purpose criteria. A final company in stage 4 that I just want to introduce that I think has made it to that point where the Venn diagrams are getting further and further in proximity is Unilever. And what's interesting about Unilever is that they've actually gone to a place where they task their soap business, as an example, with helping 1 billion people around the world improve hand washing habits. So they decided on their marketing campaign not just because it would sell their products, but because this cartoon, they believed, would be highly educational for kids and lead to much better use of hygienic products. And it was not a sales issue. It was a helping the world issue. And the CEO has talked about how they got better talent, and they've actually gotten into new markets because of it, because in, for example, parts of Africa and Asia, there are countries that have Unilever in their marketplace. They've dramatically reduced disease, and during this moment, they've actually had much better rates with COVID, and places that don't, that have not been able to. And so it's been a really strong part of their competitive position as a business. And so their purpose is literally what positions them in the marketplace. This is a rising theme among new businesses. A lot of them are coming out to be B Corps, which means they're taking into account these 5 stakeholders in everything that they do. And you can see some of the companies here. And it's even reaching what I would consider to be the ultimate in mainstream capitalism. People like Larry Fink, who are overseeing some of the largest assets in the world, now saying that purpose is not the sole pursuit of profits, but the animating force of achieving them. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we have the experts in the room with us. And I want to turn it over to the incredible panel that you saw earlier. And my first question for them is an opening fun question for them to introduce themselves. And since it's just into 2021, for them to each share a New Year's resolution. And Elaine, can I start with you?
Great. Well, thank you, Seth. It's wonderful to be here with everyone today. So Alain Turin, I'm currently Vice President, Corporate Social Responsibility for Walgreens, part of Walgreens Boots Alliance. So my portfolio spans the US geography. I've worked around the world. So if you notice an accent, I'm from Canada originally, and I've led business teams in various parts of the globe. New Year resolution. It's been such a year. Looking back at 2020, we're glad that it's behind us in many different ways, but certainly it'd be a loss not to stop and think, what can we learn from it? So personally, resolution is to keep learning, dig deeper, and make a difference from it.
That's a beautiful one, Elaine. Jamie?
Hi, I'm Jamie Jones-Zeffley. I'm Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility at the Northern Trust. I've been here 12 years and worked in several different areas. New Year's resolution is probably to just not set a resolution this year and let this year be. I feel like it's almost like a promise, as resolutions are made to be broken at this point. After 2020, I'm just going to let 2021 ride and see what happens.
Amen. I think that is good advice from someone who's been through the last year, like all of us have been. Mignon?
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Mignon Sanuda, and I work at McDonald's. I oversee our ESG engagement and reporting there. So I sit in our global impact function as part of the sustainability and ESG team and work across the business to strengthen our ESG performance with the goal of supporting investor and stakeholder confidence. In terms of resolution, I mean, I have to relate to what Jamie just said. I've instead focused on setting an intention as opposed to a resolution, because resolutions tend to be a bit more outcome driven. And my singular intention is to stay curious this year and, you know, enter conversations, meetings, relationships with curiosity instead of going in with, you know, preconceived notions or conclusions or my own personal agenda.
And Matt, you have our final resolution.
Oh, please. Seth, thank you for having me. Welcome, everyone. And I am Matt Cruz. I'm the head of social responsibility at Groupon, and that includes global span of control of just our social responsibility efforts. We do have global offices. We're in about 14 countries, and my role includes everything from philanthropy to employee volunteerism, to consumer activation, sustainability, all those good things. I think, like others, I mean, I'm not a resolution kind of guy. One thing that I think 2020 made me realize, and probably made all of us realize, is that even, you know, if you're here, it's because you care about CSR and you've you know, got a good heart, and this is work that's really important to you. And so I think when you do this work and take it on, it's always through a lens of sort of that that wanting to do more and do better. One thing that it forced me to do in 2020, and I want to do more of it in 2021, is to just have more authentic kind of check-ins with partners. I know we had to do it with family and friends, But a lot of 2020 was spent having less transactional conversations and more just kind of thoughtful, authentic check-ins, just to see how people are doing. And I think that those moments of kind of empathy and all of us going through the same thing, I'm hoping will carry into 2021. I'm hoping we don't need that as badly in 2021, but I'd like to do as much, if not more, of that in this year. So.
Well, thank you, Matt. And what I want to do now, before I jump into kind of a question for each of you, is set the table, because each of you have a longstanding CSR strategy. Each of you have also just been through 2020 and all of its disruptions, and have likely added, changed, pivoted in some aspects of that strategy. And so this is kind of a 90-second power round for each of you. Can you describe your CSR strategy in a snapshot, and then tell how 2020 impacted it? And Elaine, can we start with you?
Great. Thank you, Seth. So our CSR strategy is centered around 4 pillars, right? Healthy community, sustainable marketplace, healthy and inclusive workplace, and healthy planet. So it's things that we do that we've always done. What 2020 brought to the forefront is how strong our strategy is, and how COVID and the racial equity conversation is at the center of our strategy. So how can we continue to advocate for more affordable, quality healthcare, right? How do we make sure that our team members, the community in which we operate, are looked at from a fully diverse, equitable, inclusive perspective? How do we reinforce, right, the impact of climate change on health, and how do we bring it all together? So if anything, 2020 affirmed that our strategy is really comprehensive, and that it enables us to look at whatever comes our way and be able to be really active, whatever comes.
Well, thank you, Elaine. And I mean, truly, thank you to Walgreens, because you have been at the center of the COVID response. And I know many of us are hoping to get our vaccinations at your stores in the year ahead. Jamie?
Yeah, our corporate social responsibility is very similar in some ways to Walgreens. It's driven by our strategic focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, community engagement, our environmental impact, and sustainable investing. And we strive to be, socially accountable to ourselves, our stakeholders, and our community. I think in 2020, one thing we may have just really learned is we need to be more transparent in the things that we're doing, and so that's what we're striving for in 2021. We put out an annual corporate social responsibility report. We put out our climate change strategy, but I think we want to really focus on letting people know upfront how we can support them in ways, and more frequently with our communications. So we're trying to just make sure that we do more outreach, so that people know the ways that we are supporting our communities and the ways that they can come to us for help if they need it.
Thanks, Jamie. Mignon?
Yeah, so I think at McDonald's, we sort of followed that path that you just laid out, Seth. In the early phases, we focused a lot on philanthropy. Ronald McDonald House Charities, moved into responsibility with our own operations, our responsible food sourcing, our own human capital management, alignment with SDGs, et cetera. Those at that time were all fairly siloed, though, I will say. And so I think the next phase was really moving towards more of a global strategy. With our business model, it can be quite a challenge to have a more cohesive global approach. So that has been a big focus the last 5 years or so. And I'd say now we're in this exciting phase where we're moving more towards that purpose and that direct business integration. So focusing more on how we can minimize risk and maximize our shared value, and ensure brand trust and resiliency over the long term. So the core issues that are most material to our business haven't evolved, though it is important for us to continue to monitor those and evaluate those. But it's more about thinking how we can best address those and really create value. And I think in terms of the disruption, the comments that have already been made, I think resonate with me as well. I would also just say from an ESG perspective, specifically, this sort of evolving standards and prioritization of ESG metrics is a real challenge. And I think it's exciting to see the convergence of some of these set standard setters and ratings and rankers. And I think that that's going to really carve a path forward for, more apples to apples comparisons for shareholders, a more solid framework for all stakeholders who are really truly trying to understand what is the impact of our ESG performance versus just input.
Well, just to play out Mignon's example, because I think it's such a memorable one from a teachable perspective. You think about Ronald McDonald House, which is a beautiful program, but it's not necessarily relying directly on the core assets of McDonald's beyond the brand, right? And so there's an incredible opportunity for impact, but it's each dollar is getting a dollar of impact. Then you compare that to what Mignon's describing, and I'm familiar with Scale for Good, which is McDonald's initiative, where they're figuring out how are they going to move their entire coffee supply to sustainable sourcing, and how are they going to ultimately change the marketplace. And as awesome as Ronald McDonald is, it's a finite impact. Whereas, it's truly like the magnitude of moving their entire supply chain and then actually disrupting the marketplace so that almost everyone now felt like they had to be sustainably supplying coffee because McDonald's is one of those standard setters, had the impact of taking, a tremendous amount of carbon out of the atmosphere. So I love that ability to kind of compare those, because all of us have gotten a Happy Meal and know the company, and so can relate to that. And so I just find it a very teachable opportunity. Matt, you have our final CSR snapshot here, and then we'll jump into some more individual questions.
Seth, you seem like a guy that still gets Happy Meals.
I'm very happy when I get a meal there. Yes, I don't know that I'm quite satisfied by the Happy Meal size, but.
So these are great examples by the others on the panel. I will say that, Groupon is very focused on, building amazing communities, and that's really through the neighborhood work we do every day with, the merchants that are on our platform. My portfolio has long been very hyper local, and that's sort of in size and scope. Certainly not of the size and scope that maybe others on the panel are, and that has necessitated for me and my team to really kind of get. Not that others don't do this, but to kind of get the most juice out of a squeeze as we possibly can. And a lot of that comes with trying to engage all of our stakeholders in a particular initiative or a campaign whenever we can. I think 2021, we are going to see, and I'm excited about this, certainly looking at things through more of a DE&I lens. We probably have not integrated our merchants. Those are the businesses that sell Groupons on our platform as much in our work in recent years. And I'm excited to say that I think moving forward, we've already started doing that back in the summer and fall with some of the supporting National Black Business Month campaigns, Women's Small Business Month. And I think we'll see more of that, and that integrates really well with the business. And so my work is going to be really focused on trying to align very closely with that. The only other comment I'll make is just that, and this is probably no different than anybody else, is that we've long embedded our employees in the work we do. And so in my initiatives, we started as a company, 10 years ago that was full of millennials, full of passion, and volunteering has been a big part of our work. And that was a huge hit last year, where I think we saw our volunteering numbers were down about 80% over the years, just because of workforce reductions and everything else going on with virtual work from home. And I do think that we're looking for ways to activate our pro bono programs in a different way, because they've been a little easier to do from a virtual point of view. So doing more kind of speed consulting events that are like speed dating, except volunteering with nonprofits, doing more sort of long-term 10 to 12 week pro bono opportunities, a program we have called Group Consultation. So I think the opportunity to engage our employees, who are really the passion and the bedrock of our work, always have been, that's going to be a sort of renewed invigoration and focus in 21.
So we've set the table with the CSR strategies that each of you are executing on. And we're going to be going into breakout soon, where people are going to be discussing, how do I raise my game, right? According to that framework. And so I want to move into some tips and tools of the trade with each of you. And Elaine, if it's okay, I want to start with you, because in my mind, Walgreens is in that purpose category. You've really got into a place of strategic integration. And I'm curious if you can tell how you got there, because I know a lot of people in this room love the vision, but aren't necessarily there yet and are curious. And what are some tips you might have for the folks in this virtual room around how they move upward on that diagram toward the purpose category?
Well, thank you. I'd like to be able to say that it's all planned and calculated, but sometimes there are happy circumstances along the way. So in the U.S., Walgreens has always been at the heart of the community. People who know our community affairs teams know the civic involvement that we have in Chicago and around the country. But if we're truly honest about it, historically, there were probably more involvement in key aspects of a CSR agenda based on some executive preferences or some events that drove specific response. When we became a global company with the merger with Alliance Foods 6 years ago, beginning of 2015, we found the playbook that existed within the European part of the business, which is a clearly defined strategy against the 4 pillars that we now have today. So it was a marriage made in heaven of, we were doing all the right things here in the US, but we were not necessarily talking about them in a consistent strategic way. And we were not necessarily talking about them in a strategic way from a leadership standpoint. So put that together, we now have the 4 pillars that we've talked about, and we've continued to evolve how we integrate that throughout the activities of the company. So for example, in the last 6 years, we've started talking about, well, if we're going to talk about it more and do more storytelling, we also need to be able to satisfy various stakeholders. So we do report against GRI. We do say where our actions match the UN SDGs. We will, in our upcoming report, talk about the link to SASB and how it comes together. So there's different aspects that are evolving over time. Now, you've asked about maybe some thought or advice or peek into how we're accomplishing that. So it's through engagement at all levels of the organization. So we have our business resource groups, which are affinity group from various constituents within the company that allow us to ensure that our actions match what our employees believe, and we bring our whole self to work, and that the CSR strategy is consistent, right, with the makeup of the company. So it's the ability to listen to everyone around the company. Also, bring in expertise. Don't be shy to look for expertise. So in conversations like today, we will learn more than what we share just by talking to a lot of you today. So we do have an external advisory board that we've created for our US business, made up of experts in all aspects of the CSR agenda. So we're by no means done. The journey always continues, and there's probably set, if we looked at your progression within purpose, there's probably many different levels, right? And we're always looking to move forward and achieve the next level and build that in our day-to-day operations. And finally, what I would say is take advantage of the events. Whatever it's going on, you got to perform at the next level of excellence. So we're taking advantage this year that, okay, we're not going to have an in-person event for the launch of our CSR report, right? So we partner with Bloomberg, and we're actually going to have a broadcast that anybody can attend. So if you go on the Walgreens Boots Alliance LinkedIn page, you can find a sign up link, and on February 10th, you can join us and when we tell our story, and we hope to get feedback on how we can continue to improve what we do. And one last plug, Seth, allow me, you mentioned ability to make an impact and a difference during COVID. We shared this morning that we've already administered over 1 million COVID vaccines in long-term care facilities, and we hope to continue that with the various health authority. And with the Executive Clubs of Chicago on February 9th, John Stanley, our US president, will be sharing the vaccine journey.
We look forward to that. And certainly that is one of the most important metrics we can watch right now, is how many of these vaccines are going into arms to protect all of us. I want to segue to you, Mignon, because you've actually shared a number of characteristics with Elaine in your international experience. And you mentioned earlier metrics, which was reinforced by you, Elaine, as a key piece of really both measuring, but also holding yourself accountable on these journeys. And so I'm curious if you can speak to how you've developed ESG metrics at McDonald's, and also how your global experience has shaped your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to weave in some of those global pieces as I talk through sort of how we think about developing our own ESG metrics. I think, like I was saying earlier, this is a rapidly evolving space. And so I know it's a real challenge, not just for McDonald's, but for all companies to juggle all of these frameworks and these ratings firms and their own methodologies. You know, we do really miss the forest for the trees sometimes, so that there's a risk there. And we really want to stay focused on, you know, what is the impact we're actually trying to have here, and how can we best get there. So at McDonald's, I would say that there are 3 buckets that I think about. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but just to sort of help us wrap our heads around it. I would say when we think about ESG metrics, connecting it to our core of who we are is fundamental. I would say the second is identifying and prioritizing our material issues, and that's with input from stakeholders, but also our own internal risk assessments and analyses. And then third, you know, keeping our finger on the pulse with regulatory and reputational drivers. So first, on that first bucket, aligning with who we are, our purpose is to feed and foster community at McDonald's. So any ESG metrics that we do come up with, it needs to feed into that overall overarching purpose. And it also needs to be guided by our core values, our core corporate values. And I know that there's often, you know, a healthy level of skepticism when people hear about corporate purpose, corporate values, et cetera. And these are not intended to just be something that we, you know, put on a website or in a report, but, you know, really a way for leaders to embody some of these values and really catalyze action and unite people under a more common why and how. So I do think that those are important. On the second piece, on identifying the material issues and risks, you know, asking ourselves, what are the most material issues for our business? What are of the greatest concern to our stakeholders, including our shareholders and non-shareholder investors, but also our customers, our employees, NGOs, et cetera. And I think this is an area where it's really important to apply that global lens, or perhaps a hyper local lens, depending on how you think of it. For our brands, you know, we have restaurants in 119 countries. We have a diverse set of global suppliers. We have franchisees who are their own independent businesses. So we can't simply sit here in Chicago at headquarters and tell these stakeholders what and how to do it. So it's important that we have this overarching impact in ESG strategy and recognize that we're all under one Golden Arches brand. But, you know, our markets and our business partners in those markets, they know their communities best. They know how to serve their communities and, you know, what levers they can pull to drive impact. So I think that's really important as well. And then in addition to that stakeholder piece and that global and market lens, I think that the risk assessments, you know, ongoing enterprise risk management, scenario modeling, climate scenario modeling, for example, these are all really important things for companies if they're looking to integrate ESG more into the business and have metrics that are really going to demonstrate that resilience. And finally, that anticipate and consider regulation and reputation drivers. It's a really interesting time for the regulatory space with ESG. We're seeing a lot of this now. And I think we want to engage as McDonald's, and most companies, I would imagine, want to engage in those discussions directly and be a part of it versus having a reactive approach and then essentially cycling right back to that compliance model that you were talking about before, Seth. So we're seeing this with, you know, some really interesting developments in human capital management metrics, with the SEC amending its business disclosure rules. Those are still quite vague, but it's a step in that direction. And we could see some of that coming with the EEO1 data as well, that people are calling for more public disclosures of human capital management and DEI. And regulation, I would say, is another area where global is really important. paying attention to other trends in other parts of the world. Europe is by far the most aggressive in incorporating sustainability into their own political and economic frameworks. So they could really be considered a bellwether. And so, we keep an eye on that and think about how that could impact us here in the States, because we also now have a new administration. And I think that in addition to, closing that gap between Europe and the US on climate and climate change mitigation, some of those appointments to the SEC and the Fed and some of the other regulatory bodies are really going to drive some ESG adoption. And then lastly, just the reputation piece, how do we build trust, with our customers and other, key stakeholders? We're a really recognized brand globally. So we need, when things like the pandemic or the recession or, these social justice movements, particularly here in the States, they're really shining a spotlight on companies and how they create value for their most vulnerable stakeholders. And that includes employees and local communities. So that's something that we definitely consider when we're tightening up our ESG strategy.
Well, so I want to build, Mignon, on something that you mentioned, which is that there are so many different stakeholders, even within the company, as you think about franchisees and all these other people. And one of the things that's true in any institution is that this is a team effort because it has to be integrated. And so I'm curious, Jamie, to come to you, because you have thrived on many teams across Northern Trust. And I'm curious if you can speak to, how do you build the social responsibility ethos across teams? What's the role of leaders? And what are, if any, are pitfalls that you've seen in trying to lead with that CSR mindset? And I know you've been a leader, but you've also seen many leaders, including Connie, who is, in my mind, the role model of this. So really curious for your insights.
Yeah, I think one thing, if anyone actually, kind of looks at both Connie and I's background, actually, is neither one of us started in this space.
Yeah.
So one thing I always think that people should keep in mind is to really understand your business and what it is that you're actually, the corporation or the business that you're in, what their sole responsibility is, what their purpose is, why do they actually exist? I think that understanding that will actually make you more successful in this space.
Mm-hmm.
As you've heard from Elaine and Mignon, we have similar things we're working on. We're all trying to do better for the community. We're all trying to do better for the environment. But the way Walgreens does it is going to be different from the way McDonald's does it and the way that Northern Trust does it, because of the how what we do will impact our actual business. So I think that the thing that makes us successful is understanding how Northern Trust, for instance, makes money, how we lose money, what our clients need, what our different stakeholders in the community need. And then being able to put that business mindset on all of that and helping us to see, okay, well, how can we make that impact? And what will that impact do? Again, back to the bottom line of Northern Trust. One of the pitfalls I think that we often can make in this space is we want to do all of it. We want to do all of it and we want to do it all right now. And we have to take a step back and sometimes say, okay, what can we do in this moment? And what do we need to do in 3 to 5 years? Because we can't do all of the things. A thing that we probably will all have to do better at in 2021 and beyond is partnering more together to accomplish some of these things together, instead of thinking that I, Northern Trust, have to take this big opportunity on by myself. So for the sake of time, I'll keep it a little short for you. So.
But I want to build on what you just mentioned, Jamie, because you talked about how, the way that you're executing is going to look different than a Walgreens or a McDonald's because of the unique culture and background and industry sector of Northern Trust. And Matt Cruz, you have worked across 3 different industries in my mind. You were in CSR roles at OfficeMax, at Allstate, and now at Groupon. How does it differ to be building and executing a CSR strategy at a tech company versus some of these other industries? And can you talk a little bit about why? What informs those differences in your mind? Because I know at our virtual room here, we have people from lots of different industry sectors.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think about kind of the people in the room, and knowing that whenever I go to conferences like this, or seminars or panel discussions, everyone has questions because they're all in a different place in their journey. So I think this discussion is great. I do think that there are CSR aspects and components that are sort of industry agnostic. So I mean, I'll start with that. It's like it's largely dependent on where a company is in its history, who its leadership is and was. The CSR programming at a 90-year-old Fortune 500 company, is with this, kind of a brand like an Allstate is going to be in a very different place than, a company that just had an IPO, less than 10 years ago. So I think to start with that, I think anybody that's listening and feels like they're not at the right place in the journey, there is no right place. I think what is universal, I'll start with the universal versus the differences. I think what's universal is that at some point in the history of an organization or a company, somebody at that company said, this is super important to our story and what we are as a company. And, they put the resources behind it. And that's going to be different for everybody. And maybe that hasn't happened yet for you or someone listening. Maybe that happened 90 years ago, and you're still kind of living off the fervor of that. But I think that's what's universal. I think where industry comes into play and makes a bigger difference is really in and we can see it with everybody here, with McDonald's and Northern Trust and certainly Walgreens, is how you activate that plan, how you activate your and align with your brand and what you do best as a company. That's where the industry comes into play, right? So how a financial services protection company, with a huge agency owner presence, insurance agent presence, how they activate is going to be different than an office supply company that has retail locations and, employees that are paid an hourly wage, and then versus a tech, and I would even call us more so a Groupon, an e-commerce company these days, but with, a very millennial workforce and a younger company, a lot of engineering and marketing staff. How we activate that expertise, that time, talent, and treasure is really sort of where the rubber hits the road for an organization. And I mean, to very quickly kind of comment on that last part about, sort of, are priorities and goals different for a business? I don't think so. They're sort of masked in a different sort of lingo and language and KPI, but from a culture versus, sort of business perspective, there's the old phrase or quote of, and I don't remember who it was, Peter, I think Drucker, was like the culture eats strategy kind of phrase. Yeah. I mean, I see that every day, and it's 100% true, at least in a company like Groupon. So, when possible, and I think whenever, when you're paying attention to that culture and aligning with it and activating it and energizing it with the work you do in CSR, I think that's where the big differences are made and where successes really happen.
Well, this has been a phenomenal panel. I am immensely grateful for what I've learned, and I study this, and so I can only imagine this virtual room and all that we have taken away. And I know that we want to begin to reflect on that and think about how we apply it in small groups. And so I want to introduce the Executives Club to talk about what's next here. Megan, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. What a fantastic panel discussion. I'm here with a couple of housekeeping notes. We are about to head into about 25 minutes of breakout sessions. This is going to be choose your own adventure style. So you as the attendee are going to be able to select which breakout session you want to join. And you'll also be able to move through those at your leisure. You're going to see 7 breakouts opened, 5 for the panelists you just heard from. John Edelman will also be leading a breakout session. And then we have a 7th session open that's just for networking. So, we're trying to recreate that feeling that most of us miss of just being able to have a casual conversation with someone on our way out of a program. So if you want to be in there and just chatting with other attendees, feel free to drop in at any time. And just a couple of notes on follow-up information. This session has been recorded. You'll all get that information in a follow-up email, as well as a copy of Seth's slides. The breakouts are not going to be recorded, so feel free to ask questions freely. Each of the breakouts does have a note-taker participant in there from the Baumhart Scholars Program, which we're so grateful for their participation today. So that's information you'll also get in your follow-up email as key takeaways from each of the breakout sessions, so we can really learn from everything that went on here today. So I'm about to open up the breakout rooms. We're going to ask everyone to turn their videos on so that you can participate and have that informal Q&A session. And if there's anyone who's having issues getting into a breakout session, hang tight. I'll be able to help you and make sure you get where you want to be. But you have about 25 minutes, and then you'll get a 2-minute warning when it's time for us to get into the general session. So here we go. They are now open, and feel free to join the breakout session of your choice. All right, I think we're all back. Thank you so much, everyone, for having so much patience as we navigated that fun little Zoom snafu. I'm glad we were able to get into the breakout sessions. Apologies to our speakers who were waiting in there with no human beings. So, you know, it's keeping me on my toes. We're learning every day. But, you know, we do have some time here for some report outs for what folks, you know, had some takeaways from the sessions, you know, and we'll be closed up here in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to hand things over to Seth to take it away.
Wonderful. Well, we had a phenomenal breakout, and so I hope that the same was true for your rooms. And what we want to do with these remaining minutes is collect aha moments from across the room. And I actually have you all up on my full screen here. I can see nearly everyone. So if you want to wave your hand, that's one way. Another way is to just raise it in the participants tab or to chat. And the most valuable way, because we really want to get right into it, is just unmute and shout out. So hopefully with all those options, we will hear some voices very quickly. But what resonated for you? What's an aha moment that you took away from your breakout groups? And I see a lot of our Baumhart scholars, so I will cold call if I need to. All right, I'm going to get started on the cold calling. Margaret, are you open to sharing?
I am. Yeah, I was getting ready to unmute. I had a feeling you were coming for me, Seth. No, we had a great conversation, really facilitated by Mignon. And I think the key takeaway from us was, as everybody's transitioning, especially in this realm of reporting, from maybe never reporting before to kind of what we would think of as like traditional CSR into this more integrated ESG approach, there is no one framework. So how do you decide what issues are most material to your company, what you need to be measuring, how long it's going to take you to measure? You know, everyone's looking for that guidebook, and there is no one singular approach. So really working, you know, Mignon was talking about working across the business with other business units, really taking an active role and being active participants in that process to make sure that you can fully understand what you're measuring, have other people helping you measure it, because, you know, often we're teams of one or teams of very few, and we need the entire business really contributing to that effort.
Awesome. Yeah, I love this idea of what does it mean for the leadership to own that purpose, right? And to be integrating it, and then for everyone to kind of be looking up and in a respectful way, holding them accountable. Who else wants to share? Oh yeah, go for it, Darcy.
So I was in Matt's Groupon breakout session, and Matt, thank you for that. My aha moment wasn't really an aha moment, but just sort of like the way that you were talking about partnership, Matt, was sort of the way that I think not enough people think about partnership, in terms of, you were talking about a small investment can become a really deep engagement, and how, you know, a $4,000 investment can catalyze a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of thinkers together, versus, you know, that you're never going to be the biggest funder at the table, and that's okay. And I think people forget that. And so a lot of times, I'm a philanthropy consultant at the moment and a Baumhart scholar. And, you know, at the moment, as I'm talking to people, and I keep coaching my director about this, saying, you know, let's reach out to people. We actually reached out, Jamie, to Northern Trust the other day. We met with Shauna, and Marguerite Griffin had put us in touch with her. And they said, you know, Shauna was very sweet. She said, we're not in alignment right now, but we'd love to keep knowing about what you're doing. And Matt, you touched on that, that it's about deepening these engagements and these relationships, and being aware of what each of us are doing beyond funding. What are the resources? Who can I connect you with? Because that's the way we can work together.
Thanks, Darcy. Charity, I see you have a comment. Go for it.
Yeah, I was in Jamie's room from Northern Trust, and we had a question specifically about how to take buy-in from leadership and to apply it to the business in order to operationalize it. And what I found really helpful from that, and I've underlined in my notes, is creating an executive level CSR council, which I find extremely helpful. So being able to get buy-in from the top so that they can then get their people and their teams on board to make sure that it's a part of the priority for the full business, as being a really great idea. And something else that Jamie talked a lot about was for a firm in banking or in financial services, the environment is not kind of at the top of the list from an ESG standpoint. So how to properly get buy-in for that to be a priority with the immediacy of climate change. So doing things like competitive peer benchmarking to figure out what your peers are doing and where you stand against them to get buy-in from leadership in that way. And then also just doing the research to set the stage and make sure that you make that available to your leaders. So I thought it was a really helpful session. So thanks, Jamie, and to the rest of our group.
And Charity, I'm realizing we didn't have you introduce yourself, but you're talking about competitive benchmarks, and you happen to play a role in some of those. You wanted to share who you are?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks Seth for the background. So I work at Morningstar in financial services, and I work in our ESG sustainability team. So we work a lot in actually grading companies on how sustainable they are. And then we're also doing a lot of work to increase our own sustainability. So figuring out how we can both advise on the sustainability of other companies and make that key to our product offerings. But additionally, how do we kind of set the stage and lead by example if we're going to be grading others?
Well, we've had 3 intimidating aha moments from the standpoint that each have been so brilliant, but we have time for one more, and hopefully we haven't totally intimidated the room from participating. So who wants to share the final aha that they're taking away? I'm a professor, so I am comfortable with long silence in the Socratic method.
Seth, I'll share.
Go for it, Allison.
Thanks. From the John Edelman breakout, I wanted to take the opportunity to ask John, as an expert in this area, how do you begin to stitch together that strategy and do the storytelling around bringing all of this together? And so John shared with me a couple of things that I'll relay here briefly. First thing he said was the key thing is stakeholder engagement, really getting others involved, having those goals and quick wins. And in goal setting, he talked about looking at industry and external benchmarks and goals to get started on your own. And then final takeaway, something that really resonated with me was no matter what you're saying or the story that you're telling about your CSR strategy, the outside has to reflect the inside. So that really resonated with me. I found those things very helpful as we try to pull together a cohesive, comprehensive strategy on the inside and the storytelling that we do about it outside.
Well, I have to say that this was a perfect way to start my day. I feel like I learned so much from all of you, and I am so grateful to be a part of this conversation with all of you. And I'll just close with a little storyline that I often share in my classes as I close my class, which is that, there is a lot of business case for purpose, and it's grown dramatically. And the evidence is that companies that are high in ESG are actually significantly higher performing from a shareholder perspective. But the other thing I counsel all executives on is that there's a happiness curve, and you can look it up psychologically, and it actually totally flattens once you reach a point that most executives have surpassed by decades by the time they reach their pinnacle. And then there is a psychological value of purpose or meaning in your life curve, and it actually continues to rise throughout the greater purpose that you find in life. And so I tell all CEOs that the way to be selfish is to really bring purpose to their workplace, because at the point where they're at, that's not only how they're going to build a better company, but it's actually how they're going to build a better life. And I always just like emphasizing that as well, because yes, this is a great thing for your company, but for each leader, this is a way to build a legacy and to be truly proud of the difference that you've made in the world while being highly successful for your workplace and for your owners. So with that, I want to just turn it back over to you, Megan, and thank you for allowing us all to be part of this.
Absolutely. And I know John Edelman, our CSR Forum co-chair, has some closing remarks just to take us on our way. Over to you, John.
Okay, thank you. Great. What a great conversation we had today. A virtual round of applause for everybody. This has been phenomenal. This has been really fantastic because when we set up the CSR Forum 2 years ago, we kept on hearing, how can we apply day-to-day practical learnings and what's the framework that we use. I'm new to the journey. Well, I hope we accomplish that today, where you got a great framework, you got some key insights, a few that I learned, just the framework itself. I've thought a lot of learning there. Other comments about don't try to do everything. I love the comment, there's no right place, for CSR. You're wherever you are, and it's a journey. So those were some key takeaways for me, and I'm sure each of you have taken some practical lessons and learnings as well. And for anyone who's new to this, is your first session, Megan, will share her email to get more involved. There's more events around the corner. I hope you will consider participating. One of the ones just around the corner is on Wednesday, January 27th at noon. There'll be a virtual tour of Fast Radius and discussion with CEO Lou Rossi on evolving manufacturing and supply chain processes, which you can sign up online. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks again for joining us on this virtual CSR forum, and hope you had a lot of great takeaways and learning as I did. So thank you. Have a great day, and terrific. Thank you, panelists, for your contributions and your leadership and sharing your experience. I'm sure there were great takeaways collectively and in the individual groups. So thank each of you. And of course, Megan and Seth for engaging and making all this work collectively to bring this to everybody. So thank you all. Great program. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Take
Bye-bye.
care.